Hey, I have a question for you. Do you know what your catch rate is? Hi, I'm Den Haring and welcome back to my channel, Fish Den 365. And today we're going to talk about catch rates and how to use a couple of very simple statistics to make you a better fisherman and to allow you to catch a lot more fish. Come along, I'll show you what we're talking about. So when it comes to calculating our catch rate, it's two very simple things. It's the number of fish caught divided by the time, which is usually in hours. So let's say we caught on a particular outing 5 fish. We were out there for 2 hours. And that would mean that our catch rate is 2.5 fish per hour. It's as simple as that. If you were out there for 10 hours and you caught 5 fish, then your rate would be 0.5 fish per hour. So simple mathematics here to figure out your catch rate. Now, how can you use that to become a better fisherman? This is where it gets interesting, and we're going to take it to my computer because most people have Excel and have a basic knowledge of how to use Excel. I'm going to show you how to use Excel or just a simple spreadsheet to mark down a couple of very simple statistics that'll make you a much better decision maker in your future fishing trips, and as a result it'll make you a much better fisherman. And I guarantee if you do what I'm going to show you, you will catch more fish. Come along, I'll show you what that's all about now. You know, before we get started with showing you this in Excel, I just want to say if you're not familiar with Excel, or if you don't have Excel or even a computer, you don't have to have it to do what I'm going to show you. You can do it on paper. You can do it on in a notebook. You can do it on graph paper. It really doesn't matter. The most important thing is to just start recording some of these important statistics that'll help you become a better angler in the future. You know, I started recording this kind of stuff when I was a kid because my dad had told me that when he was a youngster, he was logging everything that he caught when he would go fishing. And this was back in the 40s probably, or even in the 30s, because he was born in 1922. So back then he lived in Percy, where Lake Nakamixon is near that today, but Nakamixon didn't exist then. It was just a number of creeks in the Delaware River. He used to fish the Tehican Creek, which is the feeder creek to Nakamixon, quite a bit in a number of different spots. And there were some small dams on the creek that he would fish as well. And he would log his fish catches, what he caught, what he was using. Him and his buddies would ride their bikes in the morning. They'd get up before dark, before light, and ride their bikes to their different fishing spots. Oftentimes this was miles. It would take quite a while to get to where they were going. Back then it was a more innocent time. They would just leave their bikes at the creek bank and leave the bike for the entire day and come back and never have a second thought about the bike still being there or not. Today it's a different world we live in. But he told me that when he went into the Army Air Force for World War II, he decided to get rid of the logbook, and he told me that, you know, he was sorry that he did that because he would have liked to have shown it to me when I was growing up. So I was probably about 13 years old at the time. So after he told me that, in 1977, I started recording my fishing trips in this little notebook here. It started here in April 16th of 77. I was 13 years old at the time. Here's an entry where I fished the Shahola Creek and caught some perch. Here's one at Beltsville. I caught a sucker, 9 perch, and 2 sunfish. So as the years went on, you know, I never got rid of this because of what my dad told me. He was sorry he got rid of his, so I always kept it. And then, of course, as time went on, going into the 80s, I got a little bit more. I would do quite a bit more detail in my recordings. And so that became more and more valuable because what you find is the more you record in these things, the more valuable it becomes to you. That information becomes valuable in learning how to go about fishing these same places in the future. Somewhere in the late 80s, early 90s, I started getting real technical. I would type all of my my fishing excursions, and at the end of each year, see if I can find a year-end one for you here, I would do a summary. And that summary would talk about all the different fish species that I caught, where I caught them, where the biggest ones came from, what I caught them on, what the #1 fishing lure was at the time for me, what I caught the most on, the #1 company back then, back in this year, was Lunker City. I can tell you what that was. It was the Sluggo. That was real popular one time. Caught a ton of fish on the Sluggo. That was kind of like the Senko before the Senko became the Senko. And then also my average size of the fish that I caught at different places, so I could tell where the larger fish were coming from, because that was of interest to me at the time. And then somewhere in the 90s, you know, when with computers, the advent of all the computers and Excel, I began doing this stuff in Excel. Actually, what I did do is I started it in a Access database, which it was a real powerful tool, because you can put in reports, you can search all different ways. And so I had an Access database for all this stuff. But Microsoft kept updating Access, and a lot of it was not backwards compatible. So I lost confidence in it, and I was able to copy all of that data into an Excel database and then continue with Excel. When I started my YouTube channel, I had stopped doing this. So it's been a few years now since I've put anything in this Excel format. And the reason for that is because I'm doing videos. I have a video record of everything I'm doing now. So, plus, there's only so much after you do this that you can learn, right? I mean, I've had years of this kind of experience, so I know what it is that I'm looking for. I have a lot of good data for the fisheries that I have. And over time, the fisheries change too, so you have to remember that. But you'll see that in your trending, if you do trending analysis on these spreadsheets, you'll see how things are changing. Whether you're getting better or if the fishery's getting worse, you have to figure that out. So in a few moments here, I'm going to show you a pretty elaborate spreadsheet with a lot of information that I used to keep when I'm doing this. And you know, you can make this, I would say, tailor this for your needs. It doesn't have to be everything that I'm going to show you. You can do some subset of the fields that I'm going to be showing you, and get just as good information and be just as helpful for how you want to fish. But this I'll be showing you just to give you some ideas. But there is one thing that you should be aware of. If you've ever done logging of fishing trips, you're probably already aware of this. But if you haven't, one thing that happens, let's say you're out there for an 8-hour day, or maybe it's even your night fishing, so you're a little tired to begin with, and you're out there for 8 or 9, 10 hours overnight. And so what can happen is you might have some notes that you'd like to take. It gets a little difficult to remember everything, especially if you're catching a lot of fish. And who wants to, after they catch a fish, take a logbook out and write what they caught every time between fishing? That's a pain in the neck. You want to get your bait back out there and catch the next one right away. So one thing that could help you remember details and remember your fish catches is a very simple recording device like this one. This is an Olympus voice recorder, and it takes 2 AAA batteries, and I found it to be invaluable, where you can just hit the record button and input information, and you can always listen to it back, you can play it back. This has more capacity than I'll use in 2 lifetimes of fishing, so you only ever need one. And you can then play this back and input that information into your spreadsheet after you get home, or some, a week later even, whatever it is. Because, like, in fishing, you don't want anything to get away. Well, you don't want your information to get away either. So having the voice recorder, nothing gets away as long as you put it in here. Because sometimes it's nice to put additional details in, like maybe you ran into a buddy and he told you something interesting while you're out there that day, or a storm came up and that changed the way the fishing was, or something exciting happened that you want to remember 10 years from now. You can give the details of that story in here and put it in a notes section in your spreadsheet. So it allows you to do some interesting things, and sometimes it's fun to go back through that stuff and reread it and go down memory lane, so to speak, and remember some of those good times in fishing. All right, let's take a look at this spreadsheet. Okay, let's take a look at our fish log here. So you can see the first item we have here is the date, the day of when you actually went fishing. The location is where you fished at, whether it's a river or lake or a stream or a pond. Season is certainly a preference that you don't have to have it in there, but I find it's nice to have the season in there because if I'm learning about a particular body of water that I fish a lot, I might find that certain seasons I catch more fish than others, and that could be an indication that the lake is, or the river or whatever I'm fishing is better in spring, say, than in summer or in fall or that kind of thing, or at least I do better then. So season's kind of nice to have. The species caught, that's simply what you caught, whether it was a largemouth bass or a brook trout, whatever you want to put in here you can as far as species caught. Now you might only be interested in certain species to learn what you're going to learn from this. So you could always put in the species that you're most interested in. With me, my log revolves around bass, largemouth, smallmouths, and also striped bass because I want to learn more about how to catch those. And so anything else I usually would not record in the species caught, but what I do instead is at the end of the file, or at the end of this spreadsheet, I have other fish caught, as you can see here. And here's a case where yellow perch caught a quantity of 12 of them, and the size was from 8 to 12 inches. So I still have information about what else I caught, which is nice to know, especially if you want to do something different for a day. You still have information that, let's say I want to go crappie fishing, and I don't know which one of those lakes is the best crappie lake. Well, if I have enough data in there, I can find out what other fish I caught and get an idea that maybe Google Lake, for example, is a better crappie lake than John's Lake. So that's where you can still learn something with other fish caught. Now the number of fish caught here, for me, I always put in as one. I put in each fish individually, and you'll understand why that is in a little bit here. Now you could put, let's say I caught 3 bass in an outing. I could put 3 in there, but I didn't catch them all on the same bait perhaps, or it wasn't all in the same spot, wasn't at the same time. There's all these other parameters that might matter over time to learn about that you'll lose the opportunity if you put the total number caught. So if I'm on an outing, let's say here, Lake of the Fish, for example, on July 25th, I'm sorry, on May 25th, I caught 3 fish in the same day here. But you can see I just put them in separately. So here's a smallmouth bass that weighed 3 pounds, and then I caught another smallmouth bass that weighed 3.25, and then I caught a largemouth that weighed 4 or 5. So, and each one of these things was caught, it could have been caught on different baits. In this case, it wasn't. But and they could have been caught in different locations. They were caught at different times. So there's things you can learn about each individual fish, and you don't want to necessarily give that information up. So, you know, you'll always find that when I'm doing my particular fish log, it's 1 fish caught every time, so I can learn the maximum about each and every fish. And that starts to matter over time when you start doing some statistical analysis. The next items here is length and or weight. You can put both in if you know them. You can put the weight in if you have a scale. With me, you know, I've been fishing for so long and catching so many of these fish that I can take a look at a largemouth or a smallmouth and make a very accurate guesstimate as to what it weighs just by looking at it. And so unless the fish is very, very large and I want to weigh it to see how big it really is, I'll just usually use an estimate here. So, you know, I've caught so many fish that are a pound and a half, 2.5 pounds, 3 pounds. I kind of know by looking at them, and I'll just estimate it and put it in that way. That way I'm not stressing the fish by weighing every single fish and using up a lot of time that I don't need to, you know, because you don't want to, oftentimes when you catch a fish, you might fire up a school of them, and you want to get right back out there to catch the next one. If too much time goes by between catching the fish, then sometimes they might shut down and you'll lose the opportunity to catch more. So you don't want to be spending a lot of time weighing fish and that kind of thing unless it's something that's really important to you. Here, the when is just the time of day. The where caught, you know, we have location of where we fish, but then each location of where we fish has different places on it, right? So you might have Eagle Bay here on Google Lake, Long Point on John's Lake, Fisher Creek Arm in Lake of the Fish. So you can see we have Carl Island. So, you know, it's where you caught the fish on that particular lake. Water temperature is important. It's one that I'll always try and record if I have a way of measuring it. With my electronics on the boat, I can always at least get it measured that way as long as my electronics are working. And you know, the way that kind of could work is you might find that the fish come really shallow in spring once the water hits a certain temperature, say 57 degrees. You know, after you have a few years worth of this kind of data, those are the kinds of things you can start picking up on and learning, and so you know when to go fishing, you know, and you can save some time that way. Let's say the water's 49, you know, the odds are that they're not going to be real shallow, and yet when it hits 57 or 55, that's time. It's time to get out there and start, you know, fishing shallow. So that's how that can help you there. Here you got water clarity, whether it was stained, clear. That could be important with the baits that you use and what works and what doesn't. The depth, that's another important factor. You know, how deep the fish was, the bait used, what you were throwing at the time, the color of what you were throwing at the time here. Now for me, I always put a yes or no as whether or not I modified the bait. I do a lot of modifications on my bait to help them be more effective at catching fish. And so if the bait's modified, then I want to note that here. For example, on this rattle trap, we remove the rattles. So that makes the bait a very different bait than one that has rattles. And then the size of the bait that I'm using, right? If you're using a jig or something like that, it's almost always a weight like a half-ounce jig or quarter-ounce jig. But some lures, they might not have a weight to them. Like some of these swim baits, they might be a 3.8-inch Kitech or a 4.2-inch, that kind of thing. So you can put that data in there as well. And then the hours fished, so that's how long you fished on that particular outing. You got to be careful with this though too, because remember we wanted to calculate our catch rate at the beginning of this video. So here we were on this what do we call this lake? Lake of the Fish, right? We had three fish caught on the same day here on May 25th. So if we scoot across here, you'll see that I was careful with how I entered the hours fished. I only put the hours fished one time, not the other times when I caught fish on that lake. And the reason for that is because you know, you don't want to, if you're figuring out what the catch rate is, you don't want to have those hours adding up when you were, you know, for each fish that you caught. You were out there for 8 hours. You weren't out there for 8 hours for every single fish. That would be 16 hours for 2 fish, and so on. But so just be aware of that. It's something that just, as long as you're aware of it, you can adjust for it and make sure that you're calculating things correctly. Pattern is something that I like to put in when it's available to me. Sometimes it's known, sometimes it's not. Some lakes and rivers are more pattern oriented than others. Some are more spot oriented. You go to a certain area and that's where the fish are, and so that's where you'll catch them. Other lakes, their fish are all over the lake, but there could be a pattern where they're on fallen wood. For example, you find that they're all in 5 feet of water along the banks where trees fell in, and so that could become a pattern. And then you can kind of dissect that and focus that in and get even better and better. And then, you know, when you have a pattern like that, you can actually call your shots. You'll know when you're going to catch a fish, and that's when it really gets to be a lot of fun. So if you pick up on a pattern, you certainly want to put that information in there, and the more you can put in about it, the better. You can always make this a bigger entry here. So that's something to think about. The weather, you know, what kind of weather did you have on a particular day? Was it cloudy? Was it post-frontal, pre-frontal, stable? It's good to know. Was it windy? Was it calm? Those kinds of things. Moon phase isn't something that I have a personal interest in, but some people are really interested in moon phase, especially trophy hunters. There's been a lot of data out there, a lot of scientific evidence that suggests that the largest fish of a lot of the species are caught within plus or minus 3 days of a full moon or a new moon. And so some people want to know that, and so that they can plan for trophy fishing. Me, I don't want to know that, and the reason for that is I don't get to choose when I go fishing so much because I work, and for me, when I fish when I can, and I don't want to be negatively influenced in my mind about what moon phase it is. Like, in other words, if a quarter moon is known to be not that great of fishing, I don't want that to affect my thinking when I'm fishing, so I ignore moon phase entirely. But it's something that could be important to you, and so I put it in here in case it's something that you would want to consider. Rod, reel used, that's what this is here. And then we have the notes. So for notes, you know, this includes a lot of different things. You might You might have run into somebody who said, hey, I was catching them like crazy at this one spot, and you might want to note that. You might have a memorable experience where you really had a great day on the water, and you can note those types of things too. It's always fun to go back after so many years and look back at these things and take a look at the notes, and it could lead to some fond memories. Sometimes it's a fun thing to do during a cold winter month, for example. And it's also when I would tend to learn the most from these spreadsheets that I would do. I would take these things, and in the winter when I couldn't fish so much, I'd start to do some analysis and see if I can't find some trends that I could utilize in the following year to become a better fisherman. And then the last couple of things here we already showed, which was other fish caught. This is a purely preference on your part. You don't have to put this in there if you don't want, or you can put every fish caught up front where we had the species caught, or you can focus on the species caught being a few, and then largemouth, smallmouth, for example, and anything else you can dump into here. Either way, it's some data that you get to capture. And so it's nice to have an Excel spreadsheet like this if you know how to use Excel, or you don't need a lot of knowledge to create this, but it's nice to have. And so you have that, but you don't have to. You can write these things down in note paper or on a graph paper and still do some of that kind of stuff manually. And we're going to show you a couple different calculations and things like that to kind of help you see maybe how trends could work, especially over a longer period of time. Like let's say you had years worth of data in here. Well, then it gets to be really interesting because you can start pulling some stuff out that can really help you become, catch more fish. So one of the things that I like to do here is, you'll notice if we go and click on line 2 here, it highlights all of our headings. And then if you go to sort and filter and then click on filter, what that does is it puts an arrow on every one of these things. And then if you click on the arrow, you'll see down here that here's all of the things that are in there. If I hit select all, then Google Lake will be included, Johns Lake will be included, and Lake of the Fish are included. If I click this button, now none of them are included. So let's say I just want to see how I did at Lake of the Fish. If I hit that and say OK, it only shows me what happened at Lake of the Fish. And so now I have a bunch of fish caught here in spring and one in the fall. And let's say I want to know how big these fish were. So I can come down here, just click in this square here, and if I hit this auto sum button right up here, then that'll actually sum all these up. It's telling me right now, it's ready to sum this up. So if I hit the enter button on my keypad here, that's the total weight of the fish that I caught, 18.75 pounds. The other thing I can do is I can just put my cursor on here and highlight all of this. And that'll tell me a bunch of things down here on the bottom, right? It says a count of 5. There's 5 different occurrences. That's what the count is. You see that right here. There's the sum of 18.75. That's the sum of all the weight of the fish I caught. And here's maybe the more important thing. What's the average of the fish I caught out of Lake of the Fish? 3.75. That's a pretty good average. So, this is a lake where I've caught some really nice fish. And so just in a couple of quick clicks, I can see that very quickly on Lake of the Fish. Now, if we go back and hit this location again, let's go back to this filter. I'm going to remove this down here. All I have to do here is right-click and then select Clear Contents, and that'll go away. But then if I hit on this filter again, let's take a look at Google Lake, and we'll get rid of Lake of the Fish and see how we did on Google Lake. So here's the the entries for Google Lake. And so you can see I have 4 here. We fished spring, summer, and fall. You can see the weight of my fish. If I highlight these, I have an average here of 4 pounds. So, Google Lake has some big fish in it. And so that's a really great average. So, and then I could do the same thing. If I come back here, I can click on Google and then hit Johns Lake. Let's see how we did there. So now we're just looking at Johns Lake. We have 4 entries, right? We've got spring and a bunch of summers. And then I already have these highlighted from before. My average is 1.91 pounds. Oops, I think that I missed one there. The average is 2 pounds. And so maybe it doesn't have the biggest fish, but maybe I catch more there. Over time you'll get to start seeing that. So this is how you can utilize real quickly some things to learn, because every one of these fields you can do the same thing with. You can hit, maybe I only want to focus on, let's say I want to go back to location and include all, so I hit include all there. But let's say I want to focus on how I did on smallmouth bass. So I go in here, and I thought I had SM bass in here. Why is that not? Oh, because only John's Lake is showing. Hold on a minute. We want to select all, say OK. There we go. And then we'll come out here, and we'll focus just on the smallmouths. So we hit that, and we say OK. And now here's all the smallmouths we caught, regardless of where we caught them. Lake of the Fish, Google Lake are the two places that we caught smallmouth bass at, and how big they were, what we caught them on. So you can get an idea. You can start to see like how this can be very useful in getting some information about what we were doing. So now let's go back here, and we'll say make all of them again. So now we got our whole entry in here. So we look at location, we'll see everything is selected. And you could do the same thing for baits. Let's say you want to know what baits were most effective and during what season. And so you can look at this and slice and dice this, dozens of ways, literally, and learn a lot each time you do it. You get the averages, you get to see what the patterns were. You can start seeing if weather made a difference, what the moon phase was. So you can really start to learn quite a bit about what worked at these different places, and what's likely to work again in the future, and what's likely not to work. So I hope that you get to see how powerful this tool can become, especially if you have a couple years worth. Imagine having 20 years worth. I had more than that, I think, or at least that much in my database. You can learn a heck of a lot with that many entries in there over time. And so this is how it can help you become a better fisherman. It helps you make better decisions. But you got to be smart about the decisions that you make, and we'll explain a little bit about that next. But I just want you to see how you can utilize something like this to to help you with your fishing, and to help you understand maybe where the bigger fish are, where numbers are versus larger fish, where the smallmouths are where you're fishing versus where the largemouths are, and then you could also, this becomes important too, like where you're catching the fish, right? Fisher Creek Arm, Carl Island. So on a particular body of water, like let's say you're looking at Lake of the Fish, you want to know where you're catching most of your fish, or where you're not catching them. That's important too. So you can learn all these kinds of things by slicing and dicing the data. Also the water temperature. I think you get the idea. You may have heard it said that there's no better learning tool than on-the-water experience, and I agree 100% with that. There's nothing that replaces that experience on the water. It doesn't mean that you can't get good information and learn by watching videos and reading books and magazines and all the fishing stuff. That's fine, but at the end of the day, and those things will only get you so far. They do help. Don't get me wrong, but at the end of the day, it's experience that really makes the difference. And what this spreadsheet can do, what looking at these statistics can do, is maximize your experience. It can maximize the information that you get from the experience that you're putting down in the spreadsheet. So this is how you can make the experience that you have, whether that's a lot or a little, work better for you. So I hope you can see how utilizing some data like that, some statistics, can really help you make better decisions in your fishing going in the future. That being said, there is one word of warning that I have to make sure that I state, because you can get to the point where the data could actually hurt you, right? You might have heard this before, fishing memories. It's not always a good idea to fish memories, and what we mean by that is you might have had a day last year, for example, on a particular lake. Maybe it was May 2nd, and you had a great day, caught a bunch of giant bass at these specific spots. And then you think, the next year comes along, it's the same May 2nd day, and you might think, hey, I can go back to those spots and have the same kind of day that I did earlier. And that's where we have to use our human brain to figure that that may or may not be true. So sometimes those things can happen. A lot of times they don't, though, because May 2nd on one year is not May 2nd on another, right? The weather could be different. the water might be 10 degrees colder from one year to the next, which would change everything about how those fish are relating and what they're doing. So you have to make sure that you use the data wisely to make the best decisions going forward when you want to catch fish and improve your fishing, and not just fish memories, because if you fish memories, you're going to, at least half the time, maybe more, be disappointed. So you don't want to do that. But that being said, there's a lot of general information that you can pull out of that kind of data that tells you, that gives you, should give you relative confidence about when fishing and where fishing might be good. It's things like water temperature, right? It's things like the weather that you experienced that day, the water clarity. When you find these things are lining up, you can predict where the fish are likely going to be, and based on the success that you had with different baits, you can either use those same baits or similar baits, or something that might be a different bait that even catches them better. But at least it gives you a place to start. You might have a specific location that you know the fish are likely to move into based on the data that you've had from past years or past seasons. So that's using it wisely, where you're not expecting the same thing to happen on the same day, but you are using the data that says this is most likely to be good now. This is where you put the odds in your favor. In my mind, fishing is all about odds, right? It's all about lining up the right things, the things that matter, and then coordinating that. It's and figuring out, how do I pick a presentation that's going to work in those circumstances. Remember what we talked about before, the old fishermen, they called it the algebra of angling, right? FLP equals success. Fish plus location plus presentation equals success. Fish, you have to know something about the species that you're after. Location is where they are. You can't catch a fish if it's not there. And then P, the presentation, the final factor, is figuring out a way to present a bait to them that'll trigger them to strike. And that's where this data can help you, because you can take a look at it, understand, and this is why I have so many different fields. The more fields you can put in there, the more data that you have at your disposal to figure some of this stuff out. So I like to have a lot of data in there. You don't need to, though. You can have just the basic of data in there and still have valuable information for making decisions on your next fishing trip. Well, I hope you found this thing useful, using statistics to become a better angler. I think it's something that's interesting, and I hope you did too. If you liked the video, please give me that thumbs up. Let me know that you're out there and that you liked the video, that you appreciated it, that you thought it made a difference. Try some of these things. If you already have a log and you're doing some things a little differently, and you have something that you'd like to share, please comment on the video. Let me know what you're doing, because if I can learn from that too. We're all students of this game, and I'd love to hear what you might be doing from a statistical analysis point of view. Remember, we're certified Bassified. If you're not subscribed to my channel already, please subscribe. And when you do, hit that bell. That'll give you a notification for when the next video is coming out. Hopefully we'll be doing a lot more very soon. Things are starting to really turn around now. We're in April, we're mid-April, and the weather's warming, the fish are starting to bite, and I'm looking forward to getting out there. I have some work to do on my boats, but once I get that complete, I'll be out there, and we'll be throwing some good baits around, and we'll see how we do. In the meantime, may God bless your fishing endeavors, and we'll see you on the water.